Good day and welcome to another Storytime sessions, and things are looking a bit different here. I'm back at the church office. Things are dead quiet over here. It feels a bit strange sitting in my office working here. But I've put up this painting here at the back. It was made by a lady called Angeline Rousseau. She was in our church a couple of years ago, and we asked her to make us a series of paintings of every book in the Bible. Unfortunately, she never finished the project. It was a bit big, but we got well into it. So you'll see a few more of them as we go through the story of the Bible. Now, we don't have a picture up for Numbers or Deuteronomy or Leviticus, unfortunately. We sort of combined it all in the story of Exodus. And it's for that reason that I actually put it up here today, now that we're going into the book of Numbers. Because it's very often we forget just how fascinating the book of Numbers is. We think about the Exodus and therefore turn to the book of Exodus. But the story of the 40 years in the desert is the story of Numbers. That's where it's recorded for us. Later in the book of Deuteronomy then, following this, Moses will revisit the story and look back into it. So today then, starting off with the book of Numbers, we look at still sitting at Mount Sinai. And we're about to leave. In chapter 10, they finally leave Sinai after having arrived there at Exodus chapter 19. So since Exodus chapter 19, with the building of the tabernacle and all of that, then through the book of Leviticus with all the instructions of how to bring sacrifices and all of that we find there, and now into Numbers, they have this, the third Passover. 2 years into the journey, it's now the third Passover that they will have. The first one was back in Egypt on the day it was, or on the night it was initiated. They had the second one then at Mount Sinai, and now a third one at Mount Sinai, and now they're about to leave finally. But at the start of the book then, we find in chapter 1, there's a census. God says to Moses, count the entire nation, all the males 20 years old and more. And they did the census, but God said, do not count the Levites. And we'll get to the Levites just now. So they counted the entire nation, and it was 603,550 men 20 years old and more. So you can sort of do your own calculations to see how much would the entire nation be if 20 years younger girls and boys, and then all the women that are older. How much would that come to? Then once they've done the census, we then go into the book, into the story. They go to the borders of the promised land, and the Lord says to them, it's time to take possession. So as they send out the 12 spies, we'll get to that in more detail still. And only 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, come back and says, yes, this is the land the Lord's given us. Let's go and take possession of it. The rest of them instill fear in the people, and faith is gone. Faith in this God that saved them out of Egypt, that brought all the plagues, that sustained them now for 2 years in a desert. Faith is gone. And so God says to them, all right, if you will not have faith in me, then now for the next 40 years, you will stay in the desert until this entire generation that should have taken possession of the land has passed away and a new generation has grown up. And so in the end of the book, in chapter 26, after the entire 40 years in the desert, again, now they're at the plains of Moab. It's just on the other side of the Jordan River, on the other side of the Dead Sea of the land of Canaan. Sitting on those plains, they have another census. They count the people again, and it comes to 601,730 men 20 years old and more. So to put it this way, the book of Numbers is the story of how 603,548 men 20 years old and more together with the rest, the women and all of that, passed away in the desert. Until that younger generation that were not included in this census grew up, and they became the 601,730 that crossed the Jordan River and took possession of the land that the Lord gave them. In another sense, in one word, the book of Numbers is the story of sanctification. It's the story of God saying, I brought you out of Egypt. I saved you from slavery to sin. And here I want to bring you in. I've had you with me. I've held you close. I showed you my glory on the mountain. I taught you how to live a life in the Spirit, a life of intimacy with me. Now, go and walk in everything that I have for you. Take possession of the life that I actually have for you, of the fullness of life that I want to give you. And in any area of our life that we will lack faith to step forward and take possession of that, the Lord will say, all right, and then I'm going to have to sanctify you until that lack of faith is gone, so that you can learn to walk in faith, walk in the Spirit, and overcome the flesh, so that you can live in the victory of a promised land that I have for you. That's really for us the essence of the story. Now, I changed the number earlier to 603,548, not 50. Why? Because 2 men of that generation in that first census did go into the promised land, Joshua and Caleb. They were the only 2 out of that entire census that ended up crossing the border, that first census. Quite a story. And they became champions in the battle, both of them. One taking possession of Horeb, Caleb, and one leading the whole nation in the battle of taking the land of Canaan. Now, I said we will get back to the story of the Levites. In that first census then, they were not to be counted. But I want to jump back, all the way back to Exodus chapter 32. In Exodus chapter 32, Moses comes down the mountain because God said to him, after 40 days up there, I'm going to wipe out this nation because they have chosen another God. They've built another God for themselves. So I will start fresh. I'll wipe them out and I'll take you. We spoke about it last week. And Moses interceded with God, pleaded with God, and God says, all right, I'll have grace. And as Moses comes down the mountain, Joshua says to him, what's that noise down there? It sounds like war. Walking down, Moses says, no, wait. It's not the sound of victory. But it's also not the sound of defeat. It's the sound of singing I'm hearing in the camp. And as they get down there, they see what the singing is all about. There's the calf in the middle with all the people dancing around it so wildly, and it's revelry in the camp. It says Moses realized that Aaron allowed the camp to run chaos, and the nation became a laughing stock for the people around them. Anybody that will come and see them will say, what a crazy people this is. And so Moses stands and he calls out, he says, who is for the Lord? And the tribe of Levi comes forward. And they are sent out into the camp to kill all their neighbors, their brothers, until order returned in the camp. Thousands died. And on that day, Moses says to them, you are set apart for God today, because you chose him above everything and everybody else. Now, what I want us to see is the Levites were dancing around that calf too. The entire nation were. It says everybody. The entire nation followed their high priest Aaron in worshipping an idol. But when the invitation came, who is for the Lord? They stepped forward. Everybody else could. Everybody else got the same invitation. Who is for the Lord? They stepped forward and they chose the Lord. And because they chose the Lord said, I choose you. You are now my special people. You are now my people set apart. So then when we came to the census, we are told, don't count the Levites because they are mine. They're not the same as the rest. They're not the same as the rest of the nation. Why? Because they chose me. Therefore I set them apart as special. I say they are holy to me. They're a sanctified people to me. Later when the land gets divided between all the tribes, God will again and again say in the book of Joshua, but do not give an inheritance to the Levi, which sounds sad. They don't get a territory for themselves. But then the Lord would say every time, because I am their inheritance. I am their inheritance. Now let's pull it back to us again. Often we stumble over the word elect, the elect, when it's spoken of in the New Testament, especially in the book of Ephesians. We sort of say, it sounds unfair. Who's the Lord's elect? Well, the elect are those who chose God. Like the Levites, we choose God, and the moment we choose God, God says, I choose you. You are mine. The invitation goes out to everybody, just like the entire nation of Israel. Who is for the Lord? And everybody that would come forward, the Lord would say, you are mine. I set you apart as mine. But what are the Levites set apart for? Here, when we get to Numbers, it said to the Levites, I give you to Aaron as a gift. How precious is that? He is the high priest. Who's our high priest? Jesus Christ. We are given to Jesus as a gift. And then they have this task to help Aaron in whatever the task is that he needs to do. To work with Aaron. To lift Aaron's burden, so to say. To help him in the work of ministering to God on behalf of the people. Being a mediator. Interceding with God for the people. That's our job. That's our task. We're told in the book of Colossians we have been given the ministry of reconciliation with Jesus Christ. So just like Jesus came and mediated between the world and God, we now have this role to work with Jesus, to mediate between the world and God, to stand and minister before God, enjoy Him as our inheritance, while we invite everybody else in the world and say, come into the tabernacle. Come, see there's a lamb on the altar. Yeah, we can pass here. The blood has been shed for you. Come, look into the water basin. See, the Lord will cleanse you through the washing of the word. That's all right. The Lord will cleanse you. You will be clean. Now see, the veil is torn. We can go right through. Our souls are saved. Our will, our emotions, our intellect, it's being transformed by the Spirit. We can go all the way through and stand before the mercy seat of Christ in the very presence of God. That's our precious role as priests, as Levites. So there's this special in Numbers chapter 3. Go and read it. There's this whole transaction where God says, count all the firstborn in Israel. Because way back in Egypt 2 years ago, every firstborn that didn't have the blood over the door was killed. Yours also would have been killed. Your firstborn too. If not for the grace of the blood of that lamb over the door, you would have passed away. Therefore, the firstborn is mine, God said. Already there in Exodus, He says it's mine. But now He says, I'm going to have a transaction with you. The firstborn belong to me. So count them all up. And they counted the firstborn 1 month old and more all throughout Israel. And the number was found to be 22,273. And then God says, you didn't count the Levites in the census. But now, for this, you need to count them. 1 month old and more. Count all the Levites. And they counted them up in a nice round number, 22,000. So the Lord says, for every firstborn of Israel, I'll take one Levi. You can keep that firstborn, this Levite is mine. All right, keep that firstborn, this Levite is mine. Reuben, your firstborn, keep it, these Levites are mine. Every one of the tribes. But you owe me 273 Levites because they're less. All right? Instead of a Levi, give me 5 shekels for every 273 firstborn that you have more. And the transaction was complete. The Israelites gave the Levites for God. Or God took the Levites for himself instead of the firstborn of Israel. And in that same sense, the word redemption is used in that transaction. In that same sense, we are redeemed unto God. He really takes us as his precious possession. He owns us. And we are his, and he says he is ours. He is our inheritance. We are not bought into a property, bought into wealth, bought into whatever else. We are bought into relationship, like marriage. We belong to God. We are his. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Now I'm going to finish off the story then, and I want to read just a couple of verses for you, because we're going to take up the story then in our next session in chapter 9. So they've set up the tabernacle, and on the day the tabernacle was set up, the glory cloud of God came down on the roof of the tabernacle. So, and it remained there. So wherever you were in the camp, and the camp was set up, some people draw it like a cross, and right in the middle of the cross, there's the tabernacle in the center, the glory of God in the center of it. So the camp were all around the tabernacle, and if you looked down the streets or over the roof of the tents, you will always see the glory cloud of God on top of the tabernacle.